This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders. Today, I'm honored to have Jim Saliba on the show. He's a certified coach and a former software developer, software engineer. So he's right there in our wheelset when it comes to our background. So he's got over 30 years in the IT industry, which I am right there with him, getting close to that 30-year mark, which is pretty awesome. So we're going to talk about leadership and how do you change from being a software engineer to having that leadership mindset. We're going to hit up a little bit about his book, The 6-Step Leadership Challenge, and talk about, how to not be stuck in your career as you advance forward. So with all that being said, Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, John. I am thrilled to be here today.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into being a leadership coach.
Sure. It's kind of a interesting journey, I guess. I started out as a software engineer. I really loved the coding and seeing things happen almost immediately. Over time, I became a manager, and that was very different. A little bit more dealing with tasks, getting a little bit away from the technology. Over time, I climbed the ladder. I became a VP of a $4 billion tech company at the time. And I went out on my own then. I started to do consulting, and I specialized in agile software development. I was very early on in that wave, helping organizations change into that model where we can adapt quickly and get things out. But over time, in this consulting, I started realizing the bigger problem wasn't doing Scrum and our engineers in the front lines. It was really the gap between what leadership thought was happening and what was really happening. So over time, I started doing a lot more coaching of the leaders, and I started finding a lot of work going on there, and actually bigger changes in the organization than if I'm working just with each of the individual teams. So I started liking it. I got my certifications in it, started really building around it. And I believe my mission is to change or transform the world of work. And I do that one conversation at a time with leaders. When I get to see a leader change and I see that virtual light bulb happen over their head and something clicks, I know I changed their life, the life of all the people and teams under that leader, their families, and also sometimes their communities. So it is an amazing thing how scaling I have become from helping just teams to helping whole organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know when I first, I've told stories ad nauseum, I guess. Now, when I first became a manager, I kind of sucked at it and wasn't a very good leader and didn't understand that I didn't scale as an individual. And having that mentor, having that one person that could kind of, make that light bulb in my head pop off to show what I needed to focus on, that it wasn't focusing on, the code reviews and getting the actual things that they're producing done perfectly, but it was about building the team and building the people. And that I'm no longer a coder of software. I'm more or less a people builder now. So I've got to focus on that.
It's a big change. It's a big step. We were talking a little bit earlier before we started recording that I find it interesting that HR still calls these soft skills because they're not that soft. You commented they're hard to do. And you know what? It is hard. And I believe that they're core skills. I call them core skills because I believe that every company, this is the core that makes them run. Without people and without real leadership, companies go away.
Yeah. Yeah, they are absolutely core skills because, I mean, we saw this when COVID happened and we had to do this transition to work from home. And during that process, we had what they call the Great Resignation, where people were leaving their jobs. And if you talk to some of the individuals that actually left their jobs, it wasn't they were leaving because of working conditions. It was more about they're leaving because of those, quote, soft skills or core skills that you're talking about weren't there from their manager. And, most people quit a job. They're not quitting a job. They're quitting their manager. They're quitting because of their leader. I
Oh,
think that's an important aspect.
yes. There's a quote around that from Dale Carnegie that if you see people leaving your organization, the first thing you do is look at the manager.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
that is true.
yeah, that was the realization that struck me because I had two people on my team of six at the time when I was an IT manager that both quit the same day. And both of them gave me different reasons and different, things. But basically, the reasons were around, well, we can make more money, going to Bank of America or Wells Fargo or one of the other financial companies. We can make more money doing that. So we're leaving to go there. And, so I go and meet with my mentor because I'm super, frustrated. I just lost a third of my team, basically. And, tell him, he's like, so why do you think they quit? I said, oh, because there's more money, in the financial industry. So he's like, that's not it. He's like, if you loved your boss, would you stay for 10% less? I go, yeah. He's like, okay, so there you go. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, it's me. He was like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid so, John. There is just that's how it is. I could tell you a story. I was working with a guy, and in an organization, they were about a $500 million company. They had about 700 in the R&D area, and there was one guy at a director level. And he said to me, Jim, I can't say no. People come to me, different departments, they ask for things for me to do, and I feel like I can't say no. So I take these all on, and his team then becomes overwhelmed with the amount of work. And then they start becoming whiplashed from start this, move to that, let's go back to this. Oh, we have to do that because he's trying to make everyone happy. And he started losing everyone on his team. Why? He was burning them out, as nice of a guy that he is, and how much he really wanted to get done. He was just burning out his team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of those core skills that we need to focus on is boundaries, is being able to set boundaries around, not always saying yes, but being able to say no, and setting boundaries around your time, around your team's time, and being that, umbrella for them to stop the rain of all the extra work coming down.
Yeah, so yes, it's hard to say no, and there's many reasons why. As people move up in their organization, um, we are trying to do things. As you said, you were trying to become a manager. As you move up, you have to be more and more leadership skills. But fear comes in. Fear is one of the big things that stop us, and I talk about it in my book. And to make it as clear as possible, I took all the fears that I've seen that stop leaders from moving forward, and I put them into four categories. The first one is fear of incompetence, or sometimes what we call imposter syndrome. This creates so much doubt in our minds and makes decisions become long and hard. But the problem is when we have these fears, it's not just affecting us, it's affecting our teams and the whole organization below us. So if we have fear of incompetence and we're slowing down our decision making, you're actually building a culture of uncertainty and all those things that go around it. The second fear is the fear of appearing foolish. This is the need for security. Fear of missing out might fit in here. but there's also a resistance to change. And you end up building a culture of conformity, which means we're losing innovation and creativity. The third one is fear of failure. This is to avoid shame and embarrassment, and that builds a culture of blame. I can't tell you how many times I've been in an organization and I see managers and directors deflect decision-making. They move it out or up or whatever, so that when it doesn't work, they have a finger to point to and somebody to blame, right? And the last one is the fear of vulnerability. This, you don't share, you don't open up, and this builds a culture of mistrust. And these things cause all kinds of havoc to the culture and to your organizations.
Yeah, these make a lot of sense to me, and I never really thought about them the way that you're saying it here. But when you talk about that culture of blame, I've worked for an environment with a culture of blame, and all that. When I look at it now, as soon as you said, it can create a culture of blame, I thought absolutely. The worst boss I ever had an extreme fear of failure, and all he wanted to do was toss people under the bus and have the rest of us toss other teams and other departments under the bus wherever I could, and it was awful.
Yeah, it kills collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
People say they are collaborating, but I don't always see that happening. They may be doing yes, I need to do this for you. I'll try to get it done as soon as possible. But that's not true collaboration. That's not really being accountable to the same results, both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people think meetings are collaboration, but that has nothing to do with actual collaboration.
There's cooperation, but not necessarily collaboration.
Yeah, there was a book I read a few years ago called Herding Tigers by Todd Henry, and it was about leading creative folks. And in that book, he talked about one of the things about teams have to have conflict. And if they're always cooperating and there's no conflict, you don't have a healthy team.
Yes.
You have a team that truly doesn't collaborate.
So there's Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he talks about the same thing, that he says on the bottom of his pyramid is trust, that we really need a level of trust within the team that I can say my ideas without being afraid that I'm going to be attacked on or belittled or whatever. And that drives that open conflict, that we can discuss things and openly and talk about the problems, not the people. I talked about doing Agile before and Scrum, and there's a retrospective in there. And whenever I coached a team in retrospectives, whether they were a team of engineers or a leadership team, it's about the problems you're trying to solve, not naming the people, because it's a problem. How do you solve it? It's easy to point the finger. It's not so easy to solve the problem.
How much of these things that we're talking about when it comes to these fears are related to a lack of self-awareness in leaders?
Oh, that's enormous. So self-awareness is an enormous piece. If you go and Google the top skills needed to be a leader, you'll get things like communication and delegation and so forth. But I think that top 2 things you need is self-awareness and self-development. Without those 2, those things don't matter. Self-awareness allows you to stop and reflect about where I am, what am I doing, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, how do I figure out my blind spots, am I overusing my strengths? All those things are needed. That's in the first 2 steps of my 6-step leadership challenge. The first step is that looking at yourself, internal reflection. What are my strengths and weaknesses and my values? The second step is looking outside. How do I integrate? How do I interface with the environment and the business around me? Am I good at running meetings? What are the relationships I have? What are the relationships I have that fill my sails and move me forward? And then what are the relationships that are like an anchor and slow me down from moving forward? So that self-awareness is an enormous piece, and it's your foundation of getting better. Without the self-awareness, you don't know what to work on. For you in your story, you became aware that it was your management style that was keeping people from staying, why people were leaving. And until then, you couldn't fix it.
Correct. You're absolutely right. Until I was aware of the problem, there was no way to solve the problem.
Right. So, and it's hard of that. In our life, there is one person that talks to us, tells us stories, tells us when we should go, when we should stop. And that is ourselves. We've been in our head talking to ourselves since the day I was born, and we're there every minute of every hour of every day. Who else are you going to trust but yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Since you've hit on the first 2 steps of the 6-step leadership challenge, well, I want to go through and quickly hit the next 4.
Sure. My third step, once we did all our inventory, it's starting to be about where do we change our story? Instead of taking our self-sabotaging stories, our self-limiting stories, how do we build our story to go forward? The first part is leaning into our own story. It's about creating a vision story for the future and a strategy to get there. And when I talk about building a vision, it's not that standard 2-line thing that every company has that you could switch around between all the companies and doesn't really make an effect. This is the day in the life, of your team, or your customer, or your product 1 year from today, and using it without all the acronyms and fancy words, being able to talk about it so your grandmother can understand it. Then is building a strategy to get there, which is not a plan. There's a difference between a strategy and a plan, and I go about that in the book. The second part is empowering that story. How do you empower it? You have to execute it. That's through getting things done. And one thing that I could talk about there really quick is experimenting. How do we experiment to get things done? We often make decisions. I hate that word. I try to get people not to use that word. The word decide, the root word is side, which means to kill off. Suicide, homicide, insecticide. When we decide, we actually take all our options and kill them all off one by one, leaving the one thing that we decide to do. So we put a project in place, we made the decision, we're going forward, more data comes in as we go forward, it's going to take longer, maybe the market isn't quite there, we missed it, but we keep spending money on it because we killed off all our ideas and we keep on going, sometimes putting good money after bad. I talk about experimenting. Experimenting is about prioritizing those ideas, taking the best one that we have now and building an experiment about it. I say experiment like a 5th grader. When I was in 5th grade, we had to do that science fair thing with the poster board and a hypothesis on top and what we did and then how it happened on the bottom. Did we prove or disprove the hypothesis? So we think we're going to build this product and we're going to get this amount of money from it. Well, what is the smallest, cheapest, fastest thing that we can do to prove or disprove that hypothesis? And it should not be building out and putting out a whole product. So That's the second part. The third part is about amplifying your story. You're a leader. You can't do this by yourself. So this is about people and process. How do you manage your people? What is the culture you are building up? What are the processes that you're using? Because this is how people interface with getting things done in your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one is about adding durability to that story. And by that is building your executive presence. And there's a lot of confusion about executive presence out there. And I put it into 5 different dimensions. The first one's identification. How do you identify yourself? Who are you? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Presentation. How do everybody else see you? What do they say about John when John is not in the room? The third one is communication, which you hear about leadership all the time. And I always say we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should be working in that priority. The next one is affiliation. Who's our network? As I said earlier, who fills our cells? Who makes us move forward? And who are the ones that slow us down? And think about your affiliation or your network up, down, across, internal to the organization and external to the organization. Now, as a leader, the last dimension is about getting this all done. So it's action. How do you take all these people, all these dimensions, and all the other quadrants and deliver results?
So I think just so you're aware, I have 3 children, and I tell them probably daily that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Yes. Yeah.
And I try to make sure they use that to understand that listening, although it's one of the things I struggle with, it's one of the most important things you can do. And as a leader, I always make it a point to listen. And when I'm doing a one-on-one, whether I'm in a meeting, I always want to talk the least and listen the most.
Right. That's right. So that's step 3. It's trying to figure out which are those pieces that you need to work on. That's the self-awareness. The next part is self-development. And I have my own 30, 60, 90-day plan with a swim lane of each of those 4 quadrants that I told you about that go across it. And I build a way to every 30 days that you're doing something in each of those quadrants. And at the end of the 90 days, you are doing a retrospective, what worked, what didn't work. This is kind of my agile stuff coming in and building the next 30, 60, 90-day plan. So that kind of builds out the rest of the steps.
I think using the agile approach to leadership is really an interesting and unique approach that seems to, it's more than just project management. It comes in very helpful when it comes to managing just people and life in general. And there was a book I read probably almost a decade ago. I guess it was Secret of Happy Families. And some guy took the agile approach he was a Scrum Master, and he decided to, what if I just use Scrum at home? And they started doing daily stand-ups with his children, and they would do that in the morning before they left for school and talk about, what they're doing today, make sure everybody was on the same plan for calendars. And then he said at the end of the week, every Sunday, they would have a family retrospective. And he said just having these open lines of communication where we don't blame people and, we talk about the things that went well this week and the things that didn't go well. Maybe we overbooked. Maybe we have too many activities going on, or maybe we should have a different plan for dinner, whatever it is. Let everybody have a voice and everybody talk. And teaching his kids this at a young age was really helpful for them, in building that cohesive family unit.
Well, if you ever hear Jeff Sutherland, who's one of the creators of Scrum, if you ever hear him talk, he'll tell you that he originally created Scrum when he was doing work in his church. It had nothing to do with software.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, I read his book, Scrum, but it's been a long time ago. That was back when, we were transitioning from waterfall to agile methodologies. But yeah, it's one of those things where, it seems so helpful for more than just software.
Yes. And it works because Simply, this is how we learn as adults. When we were children in elementary school, we just absorbed. We listened, we absorbed. As adults, it doesn't work that way. We're much more experiential. We learn by doing. We try things out. And you hear that old saying, right? You learn more from your failures than you do your successes. But that's only true when you stop and think about things. What worked? What didn't work? What will I do differently next time? So that's that experimentation component that I talked about in execution. Life is about experimenting. It always is and always will be, because that's how we are as humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's super interesting. Once I really got a handle around, leadership and was really started to enjoy it. And I called my team. We were talking one day, and I said, we're like a big lab. We're just like a science lab. We're just going to be trying different things. And, and we had this really cohesive team going. One of the things that we tried in our lab was to do volunteer work together, because I thought if we worked well together outside of work on something, that team building that we would get would come into work, and we would be better employees at work. So we started doing like once a quarter, we would go during lunch and go serve at a soup kitchen, or we would find we have an orphanage nearby that we would go, and we pressure washed all their equipment one day. And the team loved this so much that they started scheduling it on their own without me. And and they included me, but they would say, "Hey, I went ahead and booked us to do next Friday. We're going to be going over here and doing this thing." I'm like, "Oh, great! It's awesome." And that was one of those experiments that really turned into something that was, remarkable for our team. And even at one point, they all came to me and said, "Hey, next month we're going to be all taking a week off work, you two, to do a habitat build." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "We got to talk about this a little bit." They're like, "We'll work overtime. We'll get everything done. We'll be ahead of schedule on all of our projects so that we can do this." I said, "Okay, let's do it. Let's do a habitat build." So we did the habitat build one week, and the whole team took PTO, and we all went and did it. And, it was just an amazing experience.
So when you have a team like that, right, and you have a team that works together, as you said earlier on the family one, open lines of communication where we can discuss things out, things happen. Things move faster. Things that we don't need fall off, and we get to focus on the things we do need, right? Am I scheduling too much stuff in here? When we really make that self-awareness happen, either as an individual or as a team, it makes an enormous difference. Now, somebody wanted to do the Habitat for Humanity. It made it fun. They brought fun into the group, not just the work. And that's how fantastic teams work. Leadership, to make that happen, is how my mission changes the world of work.
I think that's awesome. One thing I do want to talk about is one of the things that you and I talked about briefly before we got on here is that a lot of people start getting into this leadership mindset that they get promoted, maybe just for more money, or because they think that, I'm getting a little older, maybe now I should be a manager. I know more about this team than anybody, or whatever it is. And they find themselves getting stuck. This is something that I've seen, and I've even felt before, that getting to a point where I feel stuck in my career. I feel like I don't know what to do next. I'm not sure how to move the ball forward. What's some advice you would have to someone that's in that situation?
Well, whenever I have a client and they are feeling that place, I kind of go through the 6 steps. I do use a self-assessment tool that helps understand your personality. Probably if you work for a large organization, you've done some of those. But I really use it to help identify who that person is, what they truly value to move forward. Once they know what they truly value, they can use those to grow and run their team and enjoy it, not just do the work and move up because it's more money. You need that self-awareness first. And sometimes that comes out pretty quickly in 1 or 2 sessions with a client. Sometimes it takes a long time. but it's that self-awareness to understand where it is that I want to grow and do and change is where you need. Now, for example, for me, I know that when I've had teams, I'm the long-term strategic thinker and I come up with ideas. And unless I'm grounded, I'm going to change things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I know when I build a team, I need my opposite. I don't hire a bunch of people like myself, like some managers do, because that's easier. First thing I do is get my opposite, the person who is down to the daily details, because they help me get things done. So you need the different types of people and the different skills and the different strategies that balance out you and the whole team. That's why you need trust and open communication and open conflict, because they think differently, so there will be conflict. But if we look at it openly and we manage it as a leader and we really have that happen and get past it and say, yes, okay, here are the different things, here are the decision that the team came up with, great things can get done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is great. Jim, I think I've learned a lot about in this short time period about leadership, and hopefully I can take some of these things in my life too, and I'm sure our audience will as well. How can people that are listening connect with you online and learn more about what you're doing and maybe pick up a copy of your book as well?
Sure. First, my website is jamessaliba.com. I have a leadership blog there that goes out every Tuesday. So if there's any topics you'd like to see there, send them on to me. I'd love to hear from people. My email is jim@jamessaliba.com. You're free to email me, ask me questions. My book is sold on my website, and it's also on Amazon, and it's called the 6-Step Leadership Challenge. The next thing that I'm doing, I'm building a video masterclass that goes with it. It'll probably come out a month or so after this gets posted. And I'll be looking for my first 10 people where I'll give it free for comments and feedback that I can make it better. So if you email me with the name of this podcast, you can get on that list.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I think that's great. Jim, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'll link all that up in the show notes too at ageekleader.com.
Thank you very much.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to ageekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to ageekleader.com/tip.